You're going to pay half my rent while I get back on my feet. That's just what family does. That was Michelle, my older sister. Not a question, not even a conversation. Just a text that landed on my phone at 6:48 in the morning like a brick through a window. I was still in bed. Hopkins was stretched across my feet, all 140 pounds of him, snoring the way only a mastiff can, like a man who has never once worried about anything in his life. I sat up slowly, read the text twice, and felt something shift in my chest. Not hurt, not even anger. Recognition, like I'd been waiting for this exact message for years and didn't know it. I set the phone face down on the nightstand. Hopkins lifted his big, square head, read the room the way dogs do, and rested his chin on my knee. I didn't move for a full minute. Here's what you need to understand. For 11 months, I had been the family's open tab. Groceries when Mom said the fridge was empty. The electric bill Dad swore he'd pay back by Friday. Michelle's car registration. Michelle's gym membership. Michelle's nails. Her parking tickets. A weekend getaway she called mental health. I sent money the way you throw water on a fire. Constantly. Desperately. Watching it disappear and never seeing the flames die down. I am 27 years old. I eat rice and eggs 4 nights a week. I haven't taken a day off since March. And my sister, whose most consistent commitment in the last 2 years has been her eyelash appointments, just told me I owe her. Hopkins shifted, sat up fully, and put his paw on my leg. Heavy, deliberate, like he was saying, "Hey, stay with me." I picked up the phone, typed 2 words, "Absolutely not." Sent it before I could talk myself out of it. Blue bubble, gone. The kind of silence that comes right after you do something you can't undo. 10 minutes later, my phone exploded. "Michelle, are you serious right now?" "Michelle, Mom said you'd do this." "Mom, Jacqueline, your sister needs you. Call me." Then Dad, "We're family, kid. You don't turn your back on family." I got up, put the leash on Hopkins. He stood at the door, tail moving slow and patient, waiting. That dog never rushed me once in 3 years. I grabbed my keys, locked up, and walked out into the gray morning air. Just me, Hopkins, and 47 unread messages I had no intention of opening. We walked the long way around the block. The city was barely awake. Hopkins moved beside me, unhurried, nose working the ground like he had somewhere important to get to, and all the time in the world to get there. I kept my phone in my pocket, kept my jaw unclenched, kept breathing. By the time we got back to my building, something had settled in me, cold and quiet, the kind of decision that doesn't announce itself, it just shows up, already made. I sat down at my kitchen table, opened my banking app, and started pulling wires. Mom and Dad's internet, canceled. The $400 monthly transfer I'd labeled family emergency, deleted. Michelle's car insurance that somehow ended up on my card 18 months ago, gone. Every thread I had tied myself to their problems with, I cut, one by one. My hands shook a little, not from fear, from the strange physical sensation of a weight leaving your body you'd stopped noticing you were carrying. Hopkins settled under the table, his heavy warmth pressed against my feet, steady as a wall. I closed the app, sat back. The apartment was quiet in a way it hadn't been in a long time. Then my phone rang. Dad. I let it go to voicemail, pressed play. "Jacqueline, this isn't like you. Your mom's upset, your sister's crying. We need to talk about this like adults. You can't just disappear on us. We're your family." I listened to the whole thing. Set the phone down. Hopkins crawled halfway out from under the table and dropped his head in my lap. I put my hand on the back of his neck, felt the warmth of him, the steadiness. I had spent nearly a year making myself smaller so they could feel bigger, and the first morning I took up my own space, I was already being accused of abandonment. I turned my phone off. For the first time in 11 months, I turned it completely off, and I didn't feel guilty. I felt like I had finally come up for air. That night, I heard footsteps stop outside my door. Slow, hesitant. No knock, just someone standing there in the dark, deciding. Hopkins stood up from the floor, faced the door, and went completely still. Not growling, not barking, just watching, waiting. The floorboard shifted once, then the footsteps moved away. I didn't sleep for a long time after that. Jackie, I know you're in there. I can hear Hopkins. Michelle's voice. Low, controlled. The voice she uses when she wants something badly enough to pretend she doesn't. It was 7:22 in the morning. I'd been awake since 5, sitting on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, and Hopkins pressed into my side like he could feel the tension radiating off me. When the knock came, he didn't bark. He just stood up, walked to the door, and sat down directly in front of it, a wall with a heartbeat. I didn't move. Mom's been crying all night. Dad can't sleep. You did that. You just cut everyone off without even a conversation, and you think that's okay? I looked at Hopkins. He looked back at me. That flat, patient Mastiff stare that means, your move. I stood up, walked to the door, did not open it. There's nothing to talk about, Michelle. A pause, then, open the door. No. The silence on the other side was thick. I could picture her standing there in the hallway, jaw tight, working through her options. Michelle has always been the kind of person who knocks until a door opens. It had never occurred to her that some doors were finished opening for good. I'm not leaving, she said. That's your choice, I said. Have a good morning. I walked back to the kitchen, put the kettle on. Hopkins followed me, glanced once over his shoulder at the door, then sat at my feet. His presence in that moment was not nothing. It was everything. There is something about a 140-pound dog choosing to stand with you that makes the world feel less tilted. Michelle knocked 3 more times, each one harder than the last. Then nothing. I made coffee, drank it standing at the window watching the street below. A few minutes later, I saw her walk out of the entrance of the building, phone already at her ear, gesturing in a way that meant she was already rewriting the story, telling someone, Mom probably, that I'd lost my mind, that she'd tried, that she was the reasonable one. I took a long sip of coffee. Then I called Hadley. Hadley is my cousin on Dad's side. She picked up on the second ring, like she always does, like she was already waiting. I told her everything. The text, the cancellations, the door. She didn't interrupt once, which is how I knew she understood the weight of it. When I finished, she said, "How long has this been going on?" 11 months of transfers, 3 years of everything else. She was quiet for a second. Then, Jackie, you've been feeding people who were chewing through the hand doing the feeding. I didn't have anything to say to that, mostly because it was the most accurate sentence anyone had spoken to me in a year. I'm coming over, she said. Don't open that door for anyone else until I get there. Hadley arrived 40 minutes later with her girlfriend Honey, a whiteboard she pulled from her car trunk, and a level of organized calm that only people who've been through their own version of this carry. Hopkins greeted them at the door with his whole body, tail going, doing the slow, ceremonial sniff he gives people he's decided are safe. Honey scratched behind his ears. He's enormous, I said. He knows it. We spread out in the living room. Hadley uncapped a marker and drew 3 columns on the whiteboard. Financial, proof, next steps. We worked through it methodically. Every transfer I'd made, screenshots of every demand, the voicemails I'd saved without knowing why. Hopkins settled in the middle of the floor between all of us, like he was chairing the meeting. By the time we were done, 2 hours had passed, and the picture on that whiteboard was ugly. Not because of anything dramatic, because of the sheer, ordinary accumulation of it. Money leaving my account every month for almost a year, always framed as temporary, always urgent, always somehow my responsibility. Honey looked at the numbers for a long time. Then she said quietly, "They didn't think you'd ever stop." "I know," I said. "That's the whole problem." My phone buzzed on the table. I looked at it without picking it up. Dad, this time. I let it ring out. The voicemail icon appeared. I did not press play. Hadley looked at me. "You know they're going to escalate." "I know." "You ready for that?" I looked at the whiteboard.
at the numbers, at Hopkins lying in the center of the room like a small, breathing mountain. I thought about the footsteps outside my door last night, the way he had stood up without a sound and just faced it. Steady, no panic, just presence. "Yeah," I said. "I'm ready." That evening, after Hadley and Honey left, I sat on the floor with my back against the couch and Hopkins half in my lap, which is physically ridiculous and completely normal for us. I scrolled back through 11 months of bank transfers, $1,400 in January, $900 in February. The numbers blurred after a while, not from emotion, just from the repetition, the same pattern over and over. Urgent request, transfer, silence, repeat. I closed the app, opened a new note on my phone, and typed one line. "I am not a backup plan." Saved it. Set the phone down. Hopkins sighed against my leg deep and slow, the way he does when he thinks everything is fine and you should probably agree with him. For the first time in a long time, I almost did. The next morning, I woke up to a photo on my family group chat. It was my apartment door, taken from the hallway. Someone had been standing outside while I slept, and this time they'd left proof on purpose. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m. Below it, Michelle had typed 4 words. "We need to talk." Hopkins was already at the door before I got out of bed.
"We still have a key, Jacqueline. We just want you to remember that." That was Mom's text, sent at 6:03 a.m., 2 hours after the photo of my door landed in the family group chat. I read it standing in my kitchen in yesterday's clothes, Hopkins beside me, pressing his shoulder into my thigh like he was trying to hold me upright. I screenshot it, saved it, did not reply. Then I called my building manager. Her name is Carly. She's been managing this building for 9 years and has the kind of no-nonsense energy that makes you feel like problems actually get solved. I told her someone had accessed my hallway in the middle of the night and photographed my door. I told her my family had a spare key, a key I had asked back twice and never received. I told her I needed it logged as a security incident. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. She said, "I'll pull the entry logs and change your lock by noon. Come sign the paperwork." Hopkins and I walked to the building office. He sat beside the chair while I signed, enormous and calm, drawing a long look from Carly, who said, "That dog looks like he's seen things." I said, "He has." New key in hand, I felt the first clean breath of the morning. It lasted about 4 hours. I came back from a coffee run with Hopkins. He needed the walk, and honestly, so did I, and pushed open my apartment door and stopped. The lock was new, the door was fine, but something inside the apartment was wrong. The air had that particular stillness that isn't empty, the kind that means someone was just here. Hopkins walked in ahead of me. He didn't growl. He did something worse. He went completely quiet, nose down, moving in a slow, deliberate line from the entryway toward the living room. I stood in the doorway and took it in. My couch cushions were off-center. My laptop, which I always close and face down, was open. The small dish by the door where I keep spare cash, $40, nothing significant, was empty. They had been inside. Before Carly changed the lock, they had used the key Mom just reminded me they had, walked into my apartment when I was gone, and touched my things. Hopkins stopped in the middle of the living room, sat down, and looked at me, waiting. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I took out my phone and started photographing everything: the cushions, the laptop, the empty dish, the faint scuff near the baseboard that hadn't been there yesterday. I moved through the apartment methodically, room by room, Hopkins following a step behind me the whole time like a second set of eyes. In the bedroom, my closet door was slightly open. I always keep it closed. On the floor, just inside it, was a folded piece of paper. I picked it up with the hem of my shirt, not my bare fingers. Unfolded it. Mom's handwriting. "We did this for your own good. You need to come home and talk to your father. This is not who we raised you to be." I folded it back up, bagged it, called Hadley. She answered on the first ring. I gave her 30 seconds of facts, no emotion, just what happened.
When I finished, she said, "That's breaking and entering." I said, "They had a key. A key you asked back twice that you never gave them permission to use today." A pause. "Jackie, that's still breaking and entering." I sat down on the edge of my bed. Hopkins came and sat directly in front of me, which is his version of eye contact. Big brown eyes, completely steady. I said, "I know." So we document everything, we file a report, and we don't give them a single reaction to work with. Not one. You hear me? I heard her. The hard part was that some piece of me still wanted to call Mom, still wanted to believe that if I just explained it the right way, with the right tone, something would land differently than it always had. That's the trap they built over years. The belief that if you could just find the right words, the right moment, the right version of yourself, it would be enough. It was never enough. It was never going to be. Hopkins put his paw on my knee, heavy, grounding. I reached down and held onto his leg for a second like an anchor, then stood up. Hadley and Honey arrived within the hour. We went through the apartment together again, cataloged everything, cross-referenced what I remembered with what had clearly been touched. Honey photographed the note in the bag. Hadley drafted a message to the building manager to supplement the report. I sat at the kitchen table and built the evidence folder Hadley had suggested, organized by date, time, content, screenshots, transfers, voicemails, the photo of my door at 2 a.m., the note from Mom's own handwriting admitting they'd been inside. Hopkins lay under the table, chin on the floor, eyes tracking the room. At one point, Honey refilled my water glass without being asked and set it next to my hand without a word. I didn't realize how much I needed that until it happened. By the time we finished, the folder had 31 items in it. 31 separate moments where my family had treated my home, my money, my life as something that belonged to them more than to me. Hadley looked at the folder on screen and said quietly, "This is enough." Enough for what? She looked at me. Enough to stop playing defense. I didn't respond right away. I looked at Hopkins under the table. He looked back up at me with that steady, unhurried patience he carries everywhere. I thought about Michelle's face in that hallway 2 mornings ago, the certainty in her voice, the absolute assumption that I would open the door eventually, that I always did, that I always would. And I thought about the note in my closet. "This is not who you raised you to be." Actually, I thought, maybe it is exactly who you raised me to be. You just never expected me to use it on you. "Okay," I said. "Tell me what we do next."
Hadley's question sat in the room like smoke. I looked at Michelle's post on the screen. 212 likes. A string of comments from people I hadn't spoken to in years. One girl from high school wrote, "Family is everything. Hope you work it out." An aunt I barely knew had left 3 crying emojis in a row. Philip's share sat underneath it all like a period at the end of a sentence. Heartbroken. Hopkins had moved from under the table to the couch. He wasn't supposed to be on the couch. I never corrected him tonight. I pulled the laptop toward me, looked at the post, then looked at our evidence folder, 31 items, organized by date, transfers, screenshots, voicemails, the photo of my door at 2 a.m., Mom's handwritten note in a Ziploc bag on my kitchen counter. "Not tonight," I said. Hadley frowned. "Jackie?" I said, "Not tonight. We go when I decide, not when they push." She held my eyes for a second, then nodded once. "Okay, your timing." That was the first real decision I made that wasn't reactive. Every move up until that point was a response, a cancellation, a locked door. This was different. This was me choosing the when and the how. It felt different in my body, steadier, like the difference between bracing for a wave and deciding to swim. We spent the next 2 days preparing, not posting, preparing. Honey combed through every public comment Michelle had made in the last 3 weeks. The vague posts, the sad quotes, the careful non-mentions that everyone in our circle understood were about me. She built a timeline. Hadley cross-referenced it against the dates in our evidence folder. Every time Michelle posted something designed to make me look cold, We had a receipt from that exact window of time showing what was actually happening. Hopkins stayed close the whole 2 days. When I was at the table working, he was under it. When I moved to the couch, he followed. When I stood at the window at midnight, not really looking at anything, he pressed his side against my leg and just stood there with me. He didn't need me to explain it, he just stayed. On the third morning, I woke up and knew it was time. I made coffee, sat at the table. Hopkins settled at my feet. I opened the post draft Hadley and I had written together, not a rant, not a clapback, just a clean, factual sequence of events with screenshots attached. 11 months of transfers, total amount included, Michelle's rent demand text, Mom's "You'll regret this" message, the building entry log showing the unauthorized access, the note in the Ziploc bag photographed clearly in Mom's own handwriting. At the top, one line. I've been quiet because I was raised to keep family business private, but private doesn't mean invisible. Here's what the last year actually looked like. I read it 4 times, changed 2 words, read it again. Then I posted it. I put the phone face down on the table and drank my coffee. Hopkins watched me the way he does, that flat, unhurried attention. I reached down and put my hand on top of his head. He didn't move, just held still and let me. The phone started buzzing within 6 minutes. I didn't pick it up. I finished the coffee, rinsed the mug, put my shoes on. Hopkins stood immediately, tail moving. We walked out into the morning, same route as always, same pace as always, like nothing had just shifted on the other side of a screen. We were 3 blocks from my apartment when Hadley called. "It's moving," she said. I figured. Michelle hasn't responded yet. Philip went private on his profile. Serena, your mom, her account is gone, deactivated. I stopped walking. Hopkins stopped beside me, looked up. Gone? Deactivated within 20 minutes of your post going up, which means she saw it, panicked, and pulled the whole thing. A pause. Jackie, the comments on your post, people are talking. Old neighbors, your mom's friends. Some of them are saying they always noticed something was off. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I felt tired in a way that goes deeper than sleep can reach, the kind of tired that comes from years of something, not days. But underneath it, something else, something quieter and more solid, like ground after a long time of standing on water. Hopkins nudged my hand with his nose. I looked down at him. "I'll call you when I'm back inside," I told Hadley. We kept walking. The city was loud around us. Buses, a hack mare somewhere down the block, a woman arguing with her takeout order on the phone. Normal noise, life noise. Hopkins moved beside me, easy and unhurried, completely unbothered by all of it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't check it. We made the full loop and came back up the steps of my apartment. The hallway was quiet. My door was just my door. New lock, no notes, no shadows underneath it. I let us in. Hopkins went straight to his spot on the couch. I stood in the middle of the room for a moment, looking at the whiteboard still leaning against the wall. The 3 columns: financial, proof, next steps. Next steps was almost empty. We'd filled the other 2. We'd done the work. We'd gone public on our terms, with facts, without cruelty, without performance. I hadn't called anyone names. I hadn't exaggerated a single thing. I had simply shown, in plain language with attached documentation, what the last 11 months had been like. I read it 4 times, changed 2 words, read it again. Then I posted it. I put the phone face down on the table and drank my coffee. Hopkins watched me the way he does, that flat, unhurried attention. I reached down and put my hand on top of his head. He didn't move, just held still and let me. At 9:47 that night, Michelle showed up at my building, not at my door this time, at the front entrance. I saw her on the intercom camera, coat on, eyes red, no phone in her hand for once. Just her standing there for 4 minutes and then walked away. Hopkins watched the intercom screen beside me the whole time, and when she was gone, he turned, walked back to the couch, and lay down, like the matter was settled. I wasn't sure it was.
"I'm not here to fight. I don't know who I am if you're not my sister."
Michelle said that to me on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the post went up. She didn't come to my door. She texted first and asked if we could meet outside, on the steps of the building, in plain daylight. Her idea. I thought about it for a full day before I said yes. I brought Hopkins. She was already there when we came down. No makeup, which was unusual for Michelle. Coat buttoned wrong, which meant she'd dressed in a hurry or her hands had been shaking. She looked at Hopkins the way people look at things that are larger than they expected. He looked back at her with total neutrality. No wagging, no growling, just that steady Mastiff assessment, working out whether this person was safe or a problem. He sat down next to me. Jury still out. "I'm not here to fight either," I said, "but I'm also not here to go back to how things were." She nodded, looked at the ground. "I know." We sat on the steps. Hopkins settled between us, which I hadn't planned, but didn't stop. Michelle looked at him for a moment, then reached out slowly and put her hand near his nose, the way you're supposed to with dogs you don't know. He sniffed her. Didn't move away. She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for a week. "I didn't think it was that much money," she said quietly. "I know you didn't." "That's not an excuse." "No, it's not." The street noise filled the gap between us. A bus, someone's music from a cracked window 2 floors up. Hopkins shifted and leaned his weight against my leg just slightly, the way he does when he wants me to know he's still there. "Mom's not going to reach out. Not for a while. She's embarrassed. Dad too." "I'm not waiting on them," I said, and I meant it. I had written them both letters, actual letters, on paper, that I hadn't sent yet, not because I was waiting for the right moment, because I was still deciding if the moment needed to come at all. Some doors, once you stop holding them open, are fine left closed. I was still figuring out which kind this one was. Michelle looked at me sideways. "Were you always this calm, or did you practice?" I almost smiled. "I practiced." She left 20 minutes later. No promises, no plans, no scheduled reconciliation with a bow on it. Just a nod and a quiet, "Okay," and the sound of her footsteps going down the block. I watched her go. Hopkins watched too, ears forward, tracking her until she turned the corner. Then he looked up at me. "I know," I said. "Me too." We went back upstairs. I stood in the middle of my apartment and looked at the whiteboard one more time. The 3 columns. Financial, cleared. Proof, built and documented. Next steps. 1 word. Wait. I uncapped the marker and crossed out wait. Wrote 1 word underneath it. Live. I'm not going to tell you everything healed. It didn't. Serena, my mom, sent a card 6 weeks later with no message inside, just her name signed at the bottom. I put it in a drawer without responding. Philip left a voicemail that started strong and ended in guilt, and I listened to it once and deleted it. Those aren't failures. That's just what the border between your old life and your new one actually looks like up close. Messy, unresolved, real. What I can tell you is what changed. I started eating real dinners again, not because the money suddenly appeared. I'm still paying down the debt that grew while I was busy funding everyone else's stability, but because I stopped funneling what I had into a hole that was never going to fill. I booked a certification exam I'd been pushing back for 14 months. I went, I passed. Hadley and Honey came over the night the results came in. We ate takeout on the floor because the table was covered in study notes I hadn't cleaned up yet. Hopkins moved between all of us, collecting attention like taxes, completely satisfied with himself. At some point, Honey looked around the apartment, the whiteboard, the new lock on the door, the neat folder of evidence still sitting on the shelf, and said, "You built something here. Like, actually built it." I looked around too. The plants on the windowsill that had finally stopped dying, the record player in the corner that still worked, the couch Hopkins had claimed as his own months ago, and I'd stopped pretending to object. "Yeah," I said. I think I did. Here is what I know now that I didn't know a year ago. The people who benefit most from your silence are the first ones to call you cold when you stop giving it. The people who drain you don't see it as draining, they see it as their right. And the moment you withdraw that right, you become the problem, the villain, the one who abandoned the family. Let them say it. Because the alternative, going back, reopening the account, answering the door, swallowing the next demand and the one after that isn't love. It never was. It was just the shape love gets twisted into when no one ever taught you the difference. I know the difference now. Hopkins was asleep by 9, sprawled across 2 couch cushions, snoring with absolutely no concern for anyone in the room. I stood beside him with my coffee and my phone, and the quiet that used to feel like a punishment and now just felt like mine. I didn't check the family group chat. I didn't scroll back through the post to count the comments. I didn't draft messages I wasn't going to send or rehearse conversations that weren't going to happen. I just sat there, in my apartment, with my dog, with my life. And for a first time in a long time, that was exactly enough. This story is for anyone who has ever confused being needed with being loved, who has sent money on a Sunday morning and eaten less on Monday, who has held a door open so long their arms went numb. You are allowed to put the door down. You are allowed to walk through your own life first. It does not make you cold. It makes you free.